Warm good morning to all of you to our national seminar, which is going to take place over a period of 2 days, today and tomorrow. At the very outset, let me request our student Gausia Salim to offer a flower bouquet to our chief guest, Professor Arvind Sharma. Now I request another student, Ms. Saiba, to also offer a flower bouquet to our Vice Chancellor, Professor S.M. Sajid. I again request Gausia Salim to offer a flower bouquet to Professor Furqan Ahmed. Thank you. Distinguished dignitaries on the dais, Vice Chancellor Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor S.M. Sajid, Professor Arvind Sharma, former Vice Chancellor and the founding Vice Chancellor, Mizoram Central University, my esteemed colleague, Professor Furqan Ahmed, faculty from the Faculty of Social Sciences, University Administration officials, fellow faculty members and colleagues from the Department of Political Science and other departments and centers of excellence of Jamia Millia Islamia, paper presenters and participants from Jamia and other universities from within India and abroad, students of our department and of the university at large, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to all to the National Seminar on Making Democratic Governance Work, Reinventing Public Service Delivery Systems in India. First, a little introduction about our department. As part of the 93 years of glorious pre-independence heritage of Jamia Millia Islamia, which is rearing to hit a century very soon, from the modest beginnings, our department blossomed into a full-fledged center of political studies, teaching and research, when its first batch of postgraduate students enrolled in 1977, some 36 years ago. The department has progressed gradually and various new courses and research programs were initiated, enabling the department to carve a distinct niche and explore new frontiers in the academic world. True to the traditions, and as Rabindranath Tagore called Jamia Millia Islamia as, quote, one of the most progressive educational institutions of India, unquote, with this ever-growing quest for providing an ambience for quality teaching, learning and research, the department has recruited men and women of distinction in various spheres of specialization in political science. And today I am proud to say that we do have a first-rate faculty and also first-rate students. The department is the largest in terms of students' intake and courses offered in the social science faculty, with 1 undergraduate and 3 postgraduate programs: MA in Political Science, MA in Public Administration, MA in Human Rights. The department has a vibrant PhD program with over 60 research scholars currently enrolled. Throughout the year, besides regular teaching, the department hosts seminars, panel discussions, workshops, roundtables, symposiums, colloquia, extension series lectures, and study tours for its students and faculty. The department takes pride in devising innovative pedagogical skills and the use of ICT and smart board, and in encouraging professional development and in making significant contribution to corporate life of the university and its community. We are perhaps the only department in Jamia to have 2 intra-departmental book publications in the last couple of years, a truly inclusive enterprise. It has a proactive student subject association, including highly acclaimed e-magazine called Episteme, and an excellent departmental library. Now about our national seminar. The national seminar the Department of Political Science, Jamia Millia Islamia is holding today and tomorrow will focus on how democratic governance works and the need to reinvent public service delivery systems in India. One of the most important functions of the government is to provide public goods and services to its citizens in an optimal way. The hallmark of a sound democracy is responsiveness and accountability to citizen needs through effective public service delivery systems. The questions to ask are, do democratic governance systems comparatively work better to ensure improved public delivery system because it is democratic? B. Do public powers in democracies necessarily match human welfare and better public outcomes? C. Are democracy and good governance separate and distinct phenomena? And D. Is democratic governance good for economic prosperity translated into concrete citizen entitlements? Part 4 of the Indian Constitution constitutes the core of the promise of socio-economic justice to be progressively realized through enhanced state capacity. Our proposed seminar on making democratic governance work, reinventing public service delivery system in India will focus on good governance practices in India in the post-globalized era, which is 1990s and beyond, in different sectors: infrastructure, education, health, urban civic services, e-governance, etc., initiated by either the center or different states which have reformed or reinvented the public service delivery system with visible and measurable impact on the lives of citizens. We are in the age of NPM, New Public Management, which calls for a transformative change in the role of government in society and also in government-citizen relations. The entrepreneurial government is viewed as a multifaceted, one catalytic customer and mission-driven, result and market-oriented. The citizen is viewed as a client and a customer, and the government of the day has to compete with other service delivery agents in the market. Therefore, in this era of liberalization, when the government is not a monopolistic service provider, there is an urgent need to improve our public service delivery systems through bold and innovative strategies. This journey for empowerment of citizens is not complete without each one being an equal stakeholder in the system. This journey is not complete with all citizens until all citizens are given equal access. This journey is not complete until there is transparency and probity of the highest standards. This journey is not complete until there is simplification of transactions and restructuring of the agency processes. This journey is not complete until there is true community participation and decentralization. And finally, this journey is not complete without overt political support and stronger accountability. We in the Department of Political Science therefore have chosen this theme for our national seminar to ponder over ways and means how we can contribute to the debate and discourse on democratic governance and public service delivery systems in India in all its aspects and manifestations. This particular seminar is divided into 6 technical sessions. Session 1, the state and the citizen, building political support for program delivery. Session 2, administrative reform in key sectors, case studies from Indian states. Session 3, improving health outcomes, issues of access and equity. Session 4, the education sector, restructuring and reforms. Session 5, empowering the citizen, e-governance and process delivery reform. And Session 6, urban civic services, strengthening accountability mechanisms. In today's seminar, we have paper presenters from all over India who took the trouble to come from far-off places, northeast, south, west, and eastern India. This seminar is truly interdisciplinary in its response. Different departments from political science to public administration, sociology, law, social work, to Department of Journalism have responded with quality papers. We are quite overwhelmed with the response. I welcome you all to Jamia Millia Islamia. Finally, a brief introduction about our Vice Chancellor, Professor S.M. Sajid, who will make his presidential remarks very soon. Professor Sajid's association with the Department of Social Work, Jamia Millia Islamia, involves over 30 years, over 3 decades of teaching experience both at the undergraduate and postgraduate level. He has served in various capacities, all of which are high profile and with utmost dedication and sincerity. Media Coordinator, Jamia Millia Islamia, Officer on Special Duty, AJK Mass Communication Research Center, Founding Director of the Nelson Mandela Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution, Director of Academic Staff College, Jamia Millia Islamia, Honorary Advisor, Centers for Higher Learning, Jamia Millia Islamia, providing academic and administrative leadership and supervision to 12 newly created centers of higher learning, promoting research, capacity building, and teaching in areas of contemporary relevance such as peace and conflict resolution, Dalit and minority studies, comparative religions and civilizations, media, culture and governance, West Asian studies, etc. Professor Sajid has served as Registrar, the Administrative Head of Jamia Millia Islamia for over 3 years, has been serving as the Pro Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia Islamia, and is currently discharging the responsibilities of officiating Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia Islamia since July of 2013. He has traveled to various parts of the globe, including the United States, Canada, Belgium, Germany, United Kingdom, Thailand, and New Zealand. He is the author of numerous articles, monographs, has designed and conducted projects, both national and international, director of fieldworks and placements, and he has been a member of a number of important professional organizations and educational institutions and board. And finally, he plays good tennis. We are extremely fortunate in having him in our days today. May I now request Vice Chancellor Professor S.M. Sajid Sahab to make his presidential remarks. Professor Sajid.
Professor Arvind Sharma, Professor Badrul Alam, Head, Department of Political Science, Professor Furqan, my dear esteemed colleagues from the Department of Political Science as well as other departments and centers, dear participants and students. At the very outset, I am grateful to you, Professor Sharma, to have agreed to the request made by the Department of Political Science and come to Jamia. And I also share with you, I think many of you may not be knowing, that Professor Sharma has a kind of a family relationship with Jamia Millia Islamia, and his wife, Dr. Bharti Sharma, has worked in the Department of Social Work for many years, and I think we all in the department have very, very pleasant memories of working with her. I had the privilege of working in close coordination with her while we were working and dealing with the fieldwork issues of the department. So thank you very much for coming over on this occasion to us. I think the theme of the seminar is very, very topical and relevant. But at the very outset, I think I would like to make a statement which sounds very controversial. But India, no doubt, has been boasted as the biggest democracy in the world. But the question I think we need to ask ourselves is, are we the strongest democracy? And when we ask this question to ourselves, I think then we do not have a very, very categorical and very definitive answer about it. We also, I think, need to understand the debates prior to 1948, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations. And those debates, which went on for 2 decades, are very interesting. And I think also has a bearing on the Indian democracy. The primacy which was given to the political rights over the economic and social rights, also known as the first generation rights and the second generation rights. And then you also draw an analogy when you look at the Indian Constitution, where Chapter 4, Fundamental Rights, and then Directive Principles of State Policy. There is a very close relationship between what we have in the form of economic and social rights and the Directive Principles of State Policy. And as per the Indian Constitution, they were not legally enforceable as the fundamental rights were. So we became a democracy, and we no doubt we claim, and rightly so, that we are the only democracy more developed than UK and US, where universal adult franchise was granted irrespective of any qualifications, and to all without any discrimination of gender, education or property, etc. That is fine. But at the same time, I think we must also realize that we are still struggling with making the democracy strong enough and making the rights of the people realize, in the wake of high level of illiteracy, ignorance, deprivation of the basic minimum needs and services, be it education, health. I'm happy both these have been organized as a separate sessions and themes. Safe drinking water. You know how many, still a sizable population has no access to the safe drinking water. Acute malnutrition. So the very right to life is threatened. The very right to survive and exist. The infant mortality rate is still pretty high. The maternal mortality rate is still pretty high as you compare with other countries. So the democracy, just by providing the political rights to elect a government, and whether that is a very well informed decision on part of the people, I think we need to understand that. And therefore, I think the topic becomes very, very relevant, because the key issue here is the accountability. The accountability, the empowerment of the people, even in this age when the law and legislations like Right to Information Act has been promulgated and is very much effective, which is used, misused, abused. But still, I think the arrogance of the governments of the day and the authorities of the day are still pretty high. The entitlements and then the services delivery system, which is again the major plank of this seminar, I think we need to look also at the very culture of our society. In spite of the privatization, in spite of the multinationals, in spite of transnationals coming into the service sector, I think we find that work culture which is required for the service delivery system is very much lacking. You still go and see the difference that the people will work when they are taken to the task. It doesn't really come out of their own initiatives and desire and the sense of accountability that they are accountable to the public, because it's the public money which is paying them for whatever they are doing. I think it is important for us, the educational institutions, particularly the departments like the Department of Political Science, which is also teaching and researching issues of public administration, and rightly the mechanisms. Like, what are those mechanisms and what are those service delivery systems which needs to be in place, which can really deliver, which can deliver to the needy. I think it's also very matter of great concern that what I think Rajiv Gandhi said many years ago, that only 20% of the development grants and other services reaches the grassroots and the needy. And maybe we have improved upon in 30% or 40% of it reaching today, or maybe not. We are not sure. But I think if we look at that, even that 30 or 40% which is reaching to the masses is a big relief for the people, because the absolute deprivations are so high that even if 100 rupees which are meant for them are not reaching them and only 30% of them are reaching them, they seems to feel happy about it. But I think this is not a reason for us to feel happy about it, because the pilferage is still of the extent of 70%. How to remove this, how to bridge the gap further. That is what I think the India of the 21st century and India of the 22nd century requires. I think the governance require great high sense of accountability. And that accountability, I think, has to come from the top, as an example, from the political bosses to downwards. I think, and therefore, I think the reforms, particularly the electoral reforms, which to my mind are the very, very key to eliminate all kind of corruption from the society, will be very, very critical. So everything is political. I think we must realize that there is nothing apolitical in this country, because any kind of a change which is going to come about is going to come about by invoking the political processes. Because those decisions are going to be made by the political parties, those decisions are going to be made by the political institutions. And I think the masses, the people need to be educated, need to be further empowered so that they can demand what is their due. The experiences, I think, of the Panchayati Raj institutions have been fairly encouraging in this country, which also shows the power of the people, and that the fact that in spite of their having lack of education, in spite of their being ignorant in that sense, they are still powerful enough to really exercise their rights whenever they want to, the issues which are of immediate immediate relevance to them. And I think the experiences of the Panchayati Raj institution also teaches us that unless women comes in large number in the public life, in the development, I think both the quality and the kind of development which India requires will not materialize. We are greatly failing in our responsibility, I think. The political parties of these countries who make all kind of noises about issues which win them votes, that they have still not been able to really see that the 33% reservations in the parliament and the state legislatures are legislated upon. I think the very contribution and the kind of development which has happened in the short span after this Panchayati Raj 73rd, 74th amendment to the constitution has seen that women actually, because they themselves face those kind of hardships in their day-to-day life. So when they are in a position to make critical decisions, I think the quality of their decision making is far superior than the restricted, I think, decision making process and worldview which generally men for ages have continued to make. So that is a qualitative difference. I think the 50% or 45% of this section of the population definitely deserve a better deal to also ensure that there is an accountability into the system. I'm sure that these and many other contentious issues will be debated here, and then subsequently these would also be published for wider dissemination. I extend my best wishes for the success of this two-day seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor S.M. Sajid, for your very valuable remarks. And I think for the next 6 technical sessions, we definitely would like to take your ideas forward, and we'll have a very wide discussion on all aspects in all manifestations. Before I invite Professor Arvind Sharma, our keynote speaker, so let me just read about his resume. He has been in the teaching profession for a period of over 40 years. He has taught in the university system during the first 24 years, 1967 to 1991, professor at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi during the next 10 years, from 1991 to 2001. He became the Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Mizoram from 2001 to 2006, and upon his completion of the Vice Chancellorship, he was back to teaching at various places. As far as academic qualifications, MA in Economics, MA in Public Administration, PhD from the Department of Political Science, University of Birmingham, United Kingdom in the year 1974. is a man of distinction, the recipient of the Merit Gold Medal for the University of Rajasthan for having topped the list of successful candidates in MA in Public Administration in 1967. He was the recipient of the Best Student Gold Medal for the academic year 1966-67 by the Alumni Association of Department of Public Administration, University of Rajasthan. He was given the Paul H. Appleby Award for the year 2012 by Indian Institute of Public Administration. The award acknowledges a recipient's contribution to the institute and the discipline of public administration. He has been awarded British Council Scholarship in the year 1971-72 and Indo-Polish Cultural Exchange Program Scholarship in the year 1982. He has been involved with University Grant Commission as a visiting fellow to a number of universities, including Kakatiya University, Warangal, Andhra Pradesh, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar University, Ambedkar, Marathawada University, Aurangabad, Punjab University, Chandigarh. He has been involved with a lot of professional works across various spectrums. A range of professional involvements created the space for wholesome interaction with the universities and other entities within the country. He has been a member of the governing bodies and academic bodies and selection committees and editorial boards at various places within India and outside. He has been involved in the faculty development program administered by the respective universities, academic staff colleges, and participated in numerous seminars and conferences. He has also been involved with the Open University Scheme through participation in the exercise of curriculum development and those for developing reading materials. He has also been a life member of Indian Institute of Public Administration, Indian Public Administration Association, New Public Administration Society of India, Indian Political Science Association. He has a number of books to his credit. In 1979, Management Development in Public Enterprise. In 1991, A Grammar of Public Enterprise. In 2002, Inducing Client Focus in Bureaucracy, the Citizens Charter in India. And in 2004, Bureaucracy and Decentralization. He has a number of edited books, including Public Administration Quest for Identity, Issues Before the 11th Finance Commission, published in 1999, and a number of journal articles in various journals. I think we are extremely honored and privileged to have Professor Arvind Sharma in our midst for the keynote speaker. May I now request Professor Sharma to deliver his keynote address.
Esteemed Vice Chancellor, my cohorts on the dais, distinguished delegates to this morning's seminar, ladies and gentlemen, I have been very deeply touched and moved at the kindness of my this morning's hosts. And I take this opportunity to thank you for your very kind observations and words. Coming to Jamia in many ways is reminiscent of prime time of my life. As the Vice Chancellor has pointed out, Mrs. Sharma worked here once upon a time. So it's a privilege to be asked to participate in the seminar of this morning. The delegates are slated to examine a subject of great eminence. I wish to convey my thanks to the organizers and in fact to the entire university fraternity for I deeply value the opportunity of learning that this participation makes possible. The title of the seminar is reminiscent of the profoundly influential book of David Osborne and Ted Gebler that had appeared in the year 1992 under the caption Reinventing Government. In this book, the authors argue in favor of an entrepreneurial government with increased competition in service delivery, devolved budgets, and empowered local communities, and so on. A decisive influence was exercised in shaping of India's disposition to the question of country's public delivery systems by the doctrinal emphasis embedded in particular intellectual orientations that developed, in fact, in the West. New Public Management, or NPM as it is called, inspired by the prescriptions of public choice theory, has been one such doctrine. The snappy acronym NPM refers to a wholesale incorporation into the public domain of the core values identified with the private sector. To take some examples, promotion of competition within the public sector, emphasis on results rather than procedures, creation of explicit standards of performance, performance-linked compensation, and so on. The vast literature subsumed under the rubric of total quality management forms the second source of influence on India's thinking on the subject. Customer satisfaction through continuous quality improvement forms the central emphasis of the TQM philosophy. Quality consciousness, the urge to strive for excellence, must, however, pervade the entire organization in order that its quality development effort is sustained over time. From this derives the second doctrinal emphasis of the TQM gurus, namely that the organization shall remain customer-focused only to the degree it successfully harnesses every bit of creativity of its constituents. Operationally, this will translate in strategies to encourage employee involvement in the organizational problem solving. In terms of the foregoing emphasis, sensitivity to the customer needs and a conscious focus on employee empowerment form the two defining pillars of the TQM philosophy. The enunciators of public choice theory advocated a market-based approach to decentralization. More or less parallelly, during the 70s, was developing a diametrically opposite approach to decentralization in the form of alternative development paradigm, whose advocates stressed that under the traditional modernization model, the contours, contents, and consequences of development were being dictated by a powerful self-serving oligarchy consisting of the political elite, bureaucracy, entrepreneurs, rich peasants, professionals, and so forth. That this capital-centered development, this non-participatory model, had led to a grossly iniquitous pattern of development which had reduced an overwhelming majority to a state of stark poverty. It was argued that the phenomenon of mass poverty was embedded in and arose from a state of disempowerment to which the teeming millions had been reduced. That powerlessness, the lack of voice in political processes, was a critical dimension of poverty. It manifested itself in an inability to control the forces that would determine access to resources and opportunities. In terms of this interpretation, the task of removing poverty entailed a reordering of the power equations in such a way that the oppressed of the society, pushed to the margins of the political arenas where battles for resources and opportunities are fought, were brought to the center stage of the governance process. This was an argument for fostering participation of the poor in the society's power structure and a realignment of the power equations in favor of the oppressed and the excluded. Now, I'm really not sure how far I should go in presenting this keynote address. I think I should like to suitably prune my own address in order, because we already are at 11:15, and therefore I'll try and see if I can really prune it to a size which will allow me to complete what I want to say in course of next 5 to 10 minutes. Is that okay? So this redistributive politics logic translated over time into a powerful advocacy of political devolution, revitalization of local self-governing institutions, empowerment of the local communities, grassroots activism, user control, and so on. Public service delivery systems per se could scarcely have remained insulated from the influence of powerful advocacy that alternative development paradigm had built in support of the reordering of the societal power equations. The power realignment question makes a dominant presence in the reform agendas that were proposed and pursued during 1980s and 90s. This emphasis the author of Reinventing Government had cloaked in the phrase customer-driven bureaucracies. The Clinton administration's National Performance Review underlined it in its customer-first phrase. The protagonists of the NPM underscored the paramountcy of checking the forays of the administrative class in the realm of policy through the formation of executive agencies, which are contracted by their parent departments to provide specified services. This on the ground that a civil service confined to a managerial role, which is defined by a performance agreement and supported by requisite operational freedom, will be more responsive to the client needs. As we move to India, the label that has gained currency in referring to the different strands and nuances of India's civil service reform that was announced in the second half of the 90s is responsive administration. Measures that seek to empower the citizen through a blend of information dissemination, participative management, and social mobilization strategies. Call these civic decentralization measures, if you will, form the core of the responsive administration package. This made its appearance rather innocuously in the form of an 8-page discussion note prepared by the Union Government's Department of AR&PG for the November 1996 Chief Secretaries Conference, whose recommendations were subsequently endorsed by the Chief Minister's Conference of May 1997. A prominent part of the package, now this is something to focus on, a prominent part of the package that seeks to build the power of people vis-a-vis the organizations they depend upon for a range of goods and services was recommendation for the introduction of citizens' charters. How will citizen charters scheme function? Typically, through information dissemination on the key operations connected with deliveries, such as the range of services, service standards and specifications, timeframes, and so on. So, through information dissemination on those counts, the service users will be enabled to keep track of the functioning of the delivery system. Prior citizen knowledge of the performance indicators of a given delivery system makes it possible for the program bureaucracy to receive feedback and offer response on an ongoing basis. The scheme in this way is uniquely tailored to place the service user in command vis-a-vis the service provider. That is the main emphasis under the Citizens' Charter scheme. Now, what are citizens' charters? If I may choose to focus on this particular paragraphs and eliminate the rest, A citizen charter embodies the commitment of a public service provider as to the range of services it offers and the standards and specifications of those services. A citizen's charter, in fact, entails a further commitment, and this concerns the time frame. Namely, this is a commitment for the provision of given services within a stipulated time limit. There is, in citizen's charter, a third concomitant commitment. This is that of a grievance redress machinery to address situations where the service provider failed to deliver services of the promised specifications and quality. The idea was pioneered by the conservative government of John Major in the year 1991. At its most rudimentary level, John Major's initiative involved the thought that government-citizen equation in the domain of public service delivery can be adjusted to tilt the balance in favor of the service user if recourse was had to a formal declaration that would spell out the user's entitlements and correspondingly indicate the provider's obligations. The citizen's charter of a government department is in fact such a declaration. Let me omit a few paras and come to this. India launched its citizen charter program in the year 1997 to coincide with the Golden Jubilee year of the country's independence. The program covers within its fold the agencies of the union government as well as of the state and union territory governments. In volume, the program has registered much expansion, but on the ground, nothing much has happened on account of the introduction of the Citizens' Charter scheme. The reason for this, briefly, are that the program became reduced to a ritual. The program became reduced to a ritual. Not much was done to garner, now that's the point we are emphasizing. Not much was done to garner the prerequisites of the program's success by way of the training and sensitization of the program bureaucracy, motivation of the functionaries, publicity of the program, client education, stakeholder participation, and so on. That notwithstanding, the Citizens' Charter program in India has much to look forward to. Because by 2010, that is 2010, Public Service Guarantee Acts that turn the provider commitments as to the timelines and service quality into legally enforceable rights of the service users had begun to emerge on the country's horizon. So we are now talking of Public Service Guarantee Acts that turn provider commitments as to timelines and the service quality into legally enforceable rights of the service users. These PGSAs, which are a state level initiative, with their emergence, evidently, now this is something to note. With the emergence of these acts at the state level, the citizens' charters of the concerned states become legally enforceable documents. Similar effort is presently on at the level of the union government. This in the form of the Citizens' Charter and Grievance Redress Bill 2011, which is held hostage by the Jan Lokpal politics at the moment. Now, public service guarantee legislations, I will omit the features of the public service guarantee legislations. I will come straight to the Citizens' Charter and Grievance Redress Bill. So the main point we are emphasizing is that the bill seeks to turn entitlements of the service users into legally enforceable rights. That is the main point we are seeking to stress. But as we know already, the bill is held hostage by the politics of the Jan Lokpal bill, which without doubt seeks to foster a point of great relevance and profound importance, but which in doing so overlooks a couple of obvious points. We shall come to them. But presently, just let me say what is the chief contribution of the Citizens' Charter Bill. The salience of the package that this bill offers lies in erecting a scheme under which any violation of the Citizens' Charter induces a time-bound grievance redress. This is the salience, that any violation of the Citizens' Charter induces a time-bound grievance redress. Any infringement of the Charter constitutes a grievance. And beyond this, if a grievance remained unaddressed within the stipulated time period, the defaulting functionaries attract penalty as well as disciplinary action. In other words, we are now, in our custody now is a device which will nail the bureaucracy down. And we need to pursue it with greater seriousness than we have done it so far. Just let me, by way of conclusion, say a few words on the Anna team's opposition to the Citizens' Charter Bill. I've already acknowledged that what Anna is proposing is a proposal of considerable significance and of far-reaching consequences. He wants a very powerful Lokpal, which will handle not merely the corruption cases, but under whose purview will also fall the questions of grievance redress arising from infringement of the citizens' charters. In Anna's view, grievances of citizens arise and deliveries fail because the program bureaucracy, the functionaries of the government departments seek bribes, and when they do not get those bribes, they withhold deliveries. I will just read out this final paragraph here and then conclude my address. The Anna team's insistence on lumping corruption and grievance redress under a single agency emanates from the premise that every act of non-delivery of public services is induced by the motive of corruption, that public functionaries obstruct delivery to extort a bribe. So, the corruption crusaders would seek to place all citizens' charters under the purview of the Lokpal in order that it will investigate such crimes. However, specific criteria will be required to be invoked to pronounce an act as crime. Crime has a legal definition under the CRPC, and one has to be able to prove this crime. In investigating a crime, Lokpal cannot also double as a redress authority because it has now, in fact, assumed the role of a police agency, a criminal investigative agency. And even after even after one went through a laborious process of proving a crime, it must still go through the judicial process And judiciary anyway faces the problem of astounding pendency of cases. Even if one assumed a best case scenario where everything worked to perfection and the Lokpal actually managed to put a whole bunch of people behind the bars, it does not help. There is no relief to the service users. What they wanted done was not done. Punishment did not strike at the ever-present problem of non-delivery. Therefore, the bottom line is this, that in an allegation of corruption, one will be required to prove it, whereas in a case of grievance redress, from the moment of the infringement of the Citizen Charter, from the instant one does not get what one is entitled to, one becomes an aggrieved party and a grievance is established. A grievance does not have to be proved, whereas corruption has to be proved, which is a very time-consuming process, and which turns Lokpal more into a police functionary rather than an anti-graft agent, an anti-graft agency. Friends, it looks to me I should conclude there, and I once again thank all of you for the patience hearing that you have given me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Arvind Sharma, for your very illuminating lectures. We all benefited from that one. In fact, as students of public ad and political science, we have been reading your books over the years, and we're really extremely grateful to you, and also deeply appreciative that you could find time to come to Jamia Millia Islamia, to our department today. Thank you so much. May I now request my colleague, Professor Furqan Ahmed, to deliver the formal vote of thanks. Professor Ahmed.
Thank you, Professor Alam, for giving me this opportunity. It gives me immense pleasure to propose the vote of thanks at the end of this session. I express my sincere gratitude to Professor K. Sharma, Arvind K. Sharma, a renowned scholar of public administration and former Vice Chancellor of Central University, Mizoram, for his kind acceptance to grace the occasion and to deliver the keynote address. I am extremely thankful to my Vice Chancellor, Professor S.M. Sajid, who in spite of his busy schedule has been kind enough to accept our invitation. My thanks also goes to Professor Shahid Ashraf, Registrar of the University, Professor Khan Masood Ahmad, Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, and Professor Shahid Ahmad, Finance Officer, for all their support in making this program a successful one. I am also thankful to all my colleagues in the department who have been constantly supporting us to make this endeavor successful. I am also thankful to all my students, volunteers, and administrative staff of the department who are cooperating with us through all the way to make this program successful. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels start rolling weeks ago. It requires planning and bird's eye for detail. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues who know their jobs and are result-oriented. I cannot thank everyone enough for their involvement and their willingness to take on completion of the task beyond their comfort zone. But certainly few names deserve to be recorded, like Professor Muhammad Badrul Alam, Professor Rumki Basu, and Dr. Naveed Jamal, who despite their other very important engagements worked tirelessly to hold this seminar successful. Once again, I thank you all. There is an important announcement. Please join us over a cup of tea arranged outside this building. And since we are already running short of time, we try to finish up the tea within 15 minutes, come back for the first technical session.